Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. for the Institute for Dialectical Metarealism. Today, I will be returning to the guy that is pictured right behind me. That is Roy Bhaskar, the founder of the philosophy of critical realism and the philosophy of metareality. He was a brilliant man. He lived in the London, England area. I unfortunately never had the opportunity to meet him. Well, let me change that. I did once have the opportunity to meet him, but I did not take advantage of it because I did not like the particular conference he was going to. I didn't like the guy who was organizing it. I regret that now because he died shortly thereafter. And as a result, I will never have an opportunity to see him again, at least while I remain in this world. I look forward to seeing him when I pass beyond this world and go into the next. As I've said in the past, initially, I was somewhat hesitant to bring my spirituality into my discussion of communism, and in particular of critical realism and Maoism, third worldism. But then I began thinking of Roy and what Roy did in the last 10 years of his life, which was to develop the philosophy of metareality. That philosophy ended up turning off a lot of critical realists. Many critical realists abandoned him, completely went in different directions. Some wrote against him. I found it to be very sad. Now, did I agree with everything Roy said in the last 10 years of his life? As I've said before in this podcast, no. But the general idea of bringing a spiritual perspective to communism, and Roy appears to me, although he was never explicit on this, to have been a Marxist-Leninist. I am only basing that on the fact that he praised the Soviet Union and he praised Fidel Castro. That's it. I have nothing else to go on beside that. Roy was not a politician. He was not a political scientist. He did start out as an economist or an economic student, but then switched very quickly to philosophy, and that became his career. And he finished up his life as a professor at the University of London. He died a very painful death. If you have the opportunity to watch some of Roy's videos made in the final years of his life and compare them with those that he made earlier, you will see what I mean. It was obviously very difficult for Roy to even speak. He was very, very ill. And I don't know precisely what was wrong with him, but I have some idea, but I'm not going to spread something based on pure rumor. But he had a degenerative disease of some sort. He had his foot amputated at one point, and he had a great deal of difficulty talking toward the end of his life. And Roy was a very good speaker, a much better speaker than he was a writer. Now, Roy could write well if he wanted to. He did write well sometimes, but it appears as though Roy was more interested in his ideas than in communicating them. And so, what it appears to me is that he would get wrapped up in his thoughts in his head, and he would write that way. And his editor, whose name I won't mention, but it's not a secret, you may know what his name is. His editor was a very close friend of his. It is never good having an editor who is your best friend. Just isn't. It's always good having an editor who can look at your work dispassionately. And it appears to me as though his editor, who I knew a bit, was not really capable of doing that, at least not in a way that would have made Roy's works better. And so when you read a lot of Roy's books, they come across as rather confusing, to the point where Roy was given this kind of award. It was really a mock award, but it was an award as the worst writer in the English language. And I mean, it was sad that he got that award, but it was hard to argue against it. I mean, he was simply not a good writer, but he could have been. He could have been if he were more careful and if he had had a better editor. Now, let me get to the basic point of this podcast, and that is the concept of spirituality, or metareality, as Roy called it, that he introduced into his work in the last period of his life, and especially how that relates to me and my own work. Now, I will not mention my religion for a variety of reasons. One is that I think it would be discourteous to my religion. The kinds of things I talk about are relatively controversial. Well, relatively may be unnecessary to add to that. They are controversial. And by discussing my religion specifically, I'm afraid that people might interpret my religion based upon the things that I'm saying. And that would be a serious mistake. What I say is only what I say. I try my best not to be partisan. I admit I don't always succeed in that, but I do try. I think that's all that I can expect of myself, is to try. I mean, I am a commie. It's hard to be a commie and not to be hyper political, I guess. But even then, I try to focus more on the philosophical and sociological aspects of communism than I do on the political ones. How successful I am? Well, I think it varies from podcast to podcast. But I wanted to discuss the particular way in which Roy's philosophy of metareality, which was a part of what he called his spiritual turn, has had an effect on me. First, what was Roy's spiritual turn? It had two basic phases. One had the unusually long name of transcendental, dialectical, critical realism. Now, the transcendental part, I think he got from his involvement in Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's transcendental meditation. I think, but I can't prove that. Now, I do know that he was a practitioner of TM. That I know. And it's based upon that I make the assumption, and it's only an assumption, that is where he got the term. But he also did use the term transcendental prior to that. So again, I can't prove it, but I do think that at the very least, his involvement with TM, with transcendental meditation, played an important part in the fact that he was turning in a more transcendental or spiritual direction. Now, the dialectical critical realism part is a reference to the earlier phase or turn of critical realism, in which Roy explained critical realism from a dialectical perspective, that you begin with absence, any absence, an absence in your life, an absence in society, any kind of absence. Doesn't matter what it is. Like, for example, racism, sexism, ageism, ableism, ethnicism. Those are all absences. And then the next phase is absenting the absence. That means that you try to find some way to negate that absence. So, for example, in terms of racism, one of the finer ideas to emerge with respect to racism in recent years has been the idea of being an anti-racist. That is something which I regularly call myself. I don't like the idea of people going around saying, I am not a racist, because then you're basically setting yourself up for a fight. And I'm not sure what it would mean to live, especially in American society, perhaps the most racist society in the world, and that's just my opinion, and not have the stain of racism in one's heart or mind. I think it inevitably affects everybody who lives, at least in my country. So rather than saying that one is not a racist, which may or may not be true, it's better, I think, to say that one is opposed to racism, or that one is an anti-racist, which is what I say. And therefore, I avoid getting into arguments with people as to whether or not I am or am not a racist. I simply don't ever bring that up. That way, I don't put myself in a situation where I need to be defensive. Then finally is transformation. Transformation is the ultimate goal of the dialectic. In other words, you have the absence, which is the dialectical thesis. You have absenting the absence, which is the dialectical antithesis. And then you have transformation, which is the dialectical synthesis. And transformation basically means two things, at least. One, I am transforming myself, which is where all genuine transformation begins. It begins with me. I can't expect the world to be transformed if I am not willing to transform myself. I can't expect to imagine a non-racist or anti-racist society unless I myself am an anti-racist, which I think I am. Well, I know I am. I'm opposed to racism. So that is the way in which Roy restructured the dialectic. But then again, he added the transcendental element. And what he said is, in transcendental dialectical critical realism, that the way that you go through that dialectical process is by practicing some type of spiritual activity. For Roy, that was primarily TM. Other things too, things like Reiki, which is a kind of laying on of hands healing. It's actually been researched and it's been found not to work. So I would not pay attention to Reiki. There are a lot of these different laying on of hands methods of healing, Reiki, Ray, therapeutic touch, and a bunch of others. None of them have any evidence of being successful in helping people to be healed. But regardless, Roy abandoned that, and Roy abandoned some of the other things that he was involved in, but he stayed with TM. So I think for Roy, that was the transcendental aspect of his life. And he used that in bringing about his own personal transformation. Sensing the absence, transformation. How do you do that? Well, for Roy, in transcendental dialectical critical realism, it was through TM. Now, do I practice TM? No. I have never studied TM. Do I know how to do TM? Oh, yeah. Anybody can learn how to do TM. You just Google it, and it'll tell you how to do it. It's not a secret. Well, I mean, you can pay hundreds of dollars to the organization, and they will tell you exactly what is on those websites, but you don't need to. The only reason I could think why somebody would pay that kind of money would be if they accepted the late Maharishi Mahesh Yogi as some type of spiritual initiator, maybe an infallible initiator who had the lone authority to give that kind of initiation. I think anybody who accepts that idea, maybe should have their head examined. You can learn things on your own. You don't need to have somebody else teach you. We are all very smart people, and we don't need to pay other people money for things that we can read about on our own. So, okay, in any event, I don't practice TM, although I do know what TM is, and I do know how to do it. I know all the specifics of it. I know all the secret mantras, all the things that are supposedly not supposed to be known, unless you are willing to pay thousands and thousands of dollars. But I know them anyway. Regardless, doesn't matter what I know. I have my own spiritual praxis, which I engage in. They are partially based on meditation, partially based on prayer, and partially based on dream interpretation. But not dream interpretation in the way it's ordinarily understood. Dream interpretation based upon my own spiritual reflections on my dreams. Or sometimes what will happen, I will wake up in the morning having the night before asked, let me just call her my companion for clarity and to avoid making it too complex. The maiden. In Arabic, the word is Horia, which translates, my translation, black-eyed maiden of white light. I'll just say that and leave it there. I will pray to the maiden who I have seen. I've actually seen her in a vision, I think. I know that sounds weird. I'm sorry. Maybe it'll turn you off to me, but do I care? No, I don't care. You know, makes no difference to me one way or the other. I have the maiden. The maiden is the only being I need. I don't need anybody else. I don't need any people. Well, I need people to do things like electricity and whatever, but I mean, in terms of relations, no. All I need is the maiden, the black-eyed maiden of white light. And again, she appeared at the foot of my bed, and she gave me empathy as an autistic. And she is always with me, right on my left side, leaning on my shoulder. She never leaves me. She is, in my view, both present and omnipresent, meaning she is present with each of us individually, but she is omnipresent in the sense that she is also everywhere. She is ubiquitous. So she has those two different aspects to her nature. But I've seen her. I've seen her. I've seen her. She has a humanoid body, but a very non-human-like face. I'll leave it at there. I'll leave it there. No point in getting beyond it. When I talk about her, it is honestly very difficult for me to stop. I love her so much. She is the beloved of my life. I even once asked her to marry me, which is weird, I know. And in my spiritual experience, she said yes. So whether rightly or wrongly, I consider Horia to be my wife. As an autistic, I could never get married. I wanted to when I was younger, more than anything else in the world. I tried dating women, going out to restaurants. I remember once meeting in a restaurant with a woman. It was a blind date. She said that she was going into the bathroom, but she never came back. That is a common experience among autistics because we do not very easily pick up on social cues. I'll give you another example, and this is not really a date, but it makes the point. I go down to Mexico. It's only 2 miles from me. This one place I go is called Nuevo Progreso. It's a tourist area, but there also are a lot of nice people there you can talk with. I have a good friend there. I can be in Mexico in just about 3 minutes. This place is about a half an hour away, but I go there because it's bigger and there's more to do. And this woman said, come, sit down, have lunch. And I said, well, I'd rather walk around the place. He said, oh, no, come here and sit down here at the table. And I said, okay. She said, I'll make you some tacos. I said, okay, but I want genuine Mexican tacos, not Tex-Mex. And she said, I will make you genuine Mexican tacos. They were very good. There was a woman sitting on the same, I guess, table, like a bench, as I was. But she wasn't eating, and I couldn't figure out, why is this woman here? Why is she here? And I couldn't figure it out. That's my autism. It made no sense to me. I said hi. Hi. I can say hi to people. I'll greet people. I can talk people's head off, which I couldn't do as a kid. And I said, I said, where are you from? And she said, I'm from McAllen, which is right next to me. I said, oh, I'm in Mission, right next door, Mission, Texas. That's the only thing that we said to each other. The rest of the conversation was between the proprietor of this outdoor restaurant and myself, and eventually the woman walked away. It later occurred to me that this woman was a prostitute. And I found out later that's what they do. these people with restaurants, especially the outdoor ones, make deals with prostitutes where they will allow the prostitute to sit in the restaurant to pick up, I guess, a customer, which I suppose that's what she had expected me to be. And then they will get a cut, meaning the proprietor of the restaurant will get a cut. Well, it didn't work with me. For one thing, I had no interest in seeing a prostitute anyway. I wouldn't do that anyway. But even if I did, well, I mean, I had no idea what she was. I literally was clueless. About an hour later, after leaving that restaurant, I said, "Oh, she was a hooker." Then I began to look around, all around me, on every street corner. And I noticed that there were streetwalkers on every single street corner I saw. That's big business there. It's also legal. It's legal there. Not legal in Texas, but on the Mexican side, at least in Nuevo Progreso, it is legal. It's very sad to me as a commie. I'm not a progressive. I don't like seeing the fact that women to survive have to sell their bodies to men. I think that is really a shame. I feel bad for the women. I don't condemn them. I feel bad for them. Anyway, that really is an aside from where I wanted to go. But regardless, I wanted to correct that absence. But how do you correct an absence in prostitution when you are not from that area? And I realized I could not do it. I wanted to help those people transcend their condition, practicing transcendental dialectical critical realism. But how was I going to do that? So I recognized that despite all of my hopes, I really had no way to act on them. And so I just gave up. That was the end of it. Now, when I go back there, I see those same people, well, or people like them. Some of them look like they're drugged out of their minds. It is really, really sad. Really, really sad. I mean, these are very, very poor people. They are selling their bodies in desperation. They should not have to do that. And the fact that these so-called progressives would fight for the rights of women in the sex industry is, to me, shameful. They are literally fighting for the oppression of women. I don't understand it. Well, I guess that's why I'm a commie and not a progressive. That is my way of illustrating Roy Bhaskar's transcendental dialectical critical realism and my attempt to put it into practice in my own life. That was the first part of Roy's spiritual turn, as he called it. It was an epistemological turn, meaning it was a turn in how we see things, in how we view reality, how we perceive the things around us, including the people around us. And I was all of a sudden focused on trying to genuinely perceive and understand people that I literally had no understanding of in the past. I really don't fully understand them now, but at least I have empathy for them. I care for them. I hope they have better lives in the future. I do. Am I optimistic about that? No. No, I'm not optimistic. But I hope. I hope. Sorry. It's tough for me to talk about this without reacting in the way I'm reacting. It's very personal to me. I take critical realism very seriously. The next stage of Roy's spiritual turn and the final stage or turn of his critical realism was the philosophy of metareality. Many people have confused transcendental dialectical critical realism with the philosophy of metareality. They're related. They're both parts of his spiritual turn, but they are not the same. Transcendental dialectical critical realism is epistemological. It's based on understanding, perception, and knowledge. The philosophy of metareality is based on ontology, on who I am, on who you are. I love birds. What are birds? Whatever they are, I love them. I see their ontology. I love their ontology. Same with dogs and with cats and with at least some people. I wish I could say more. But regardless, the philosophy of metareality is the attempt to actually become a new being, because ontology is about being. Epistemology is about knowledge. And being is more important than knowledge. Being is not the same as knowledge. Too often, especially in the so-called New Age movement, which began after the decline of my movement, the New Left, in the early 1970s. That's a very idealistic movement. It focuses on consciousness. Everything to New Agers is consciousness, is thought, is mind, sometimes universal mind. That's the New Age movement. That is a totally defective approach to understanding who we are. We are not consciousness. We have consciousness. That is the transcendental dialectical critical realism. But I am not consciousness. I have it. I am a being. And so my question is, what kind of a being do I want to become? I ask myself that question all the time. I ask my beloved Horia, my spiritual wife, the black-eyed maiden of white light, who appeared at my bedside, the foot of my bed. She bumped in twice into my bedside and said, "Uh-oh," took my keys from the wall, prompting the property manager to encourage me to file a police report, which I did reluctantly, without telling him the details. 2 days later, the keys were returned, and I canceled the police report. That's my Horia. That is the being that is always with me. And I am never afraid to talk about her. I love her from the innermost depths of my heart. I can't imagine a life without Horia. And Horia is around all of us. She's there. You may not see her with your inner vision, your insight, but she is there. And if you open yourself to her, you can see her too. And so, by my awareness of the maiden, of Horia, I have been able to work on transforming my own being to become a new person, a person of empathy, a person of love and compassion, which I simply never was before I met the maiden. I did not even know what love was. I once sat at the kitchen table in my parents' house. I was the only person home. And I thought to myself, Mark, you don't love anybody, including yourself. Mark, you don't know what love is. Both true statements. Common autistic experience. I lacked what Edmund Husserl called intersubjectivity. I could not connect with my own subjectivity, and therefore I could not connect with the subjectivities of others. I was a stranger in a strange world. I was lost until the maiden found me and made me a new creature. And I will always, for all eternity, be grateful to her. For me, that is the philosophy of metareality. That is how I have taken Roy Bhaskar's philosophy of metareality and adapted it to myself, becoming an entirely new being. Metareality is a very powerful philosophy. It is both Marxist and spiritual. It is a strange melding of those two things. You don't often hear about spiritual Marxism or spiritual Marxism-Leninism, which is what critical realism is, I think. But that's precisely what I discovered. That's where I am. And that's where I always want to be. And again, if I had a choice, if a genie came to me and said, Mark, you only have one wish. Forget the 3 wishes. You only have one wish. I know what that one wish would be. To spend my eternity, my being, my substance, with Horia, the black-eyed maiden of white light. An actual being, not human, but humanoid in appearance, multicolored in her face, and brilliant, emanating this brilliant light from all over her body. And she is with you too, whether you know it or not. She is with you. She is available to you to awaken you, just like she awakened me from my lack of empathy. Now, does that mean I'm no longer an autistic? No. I know I'm an autistic based on my thinking patterns. But I'm a weird creature. I am a male autistic with overwhelming empathy. Overwhelming empathy. That is very, very strange. I cry at the slightest provocation. When I was younger, I wasn't able to cry. Even at things that I should, I simply could not. I did not know how to. And I didn't feel sufficient pain to even have the desire to cry. And yet now, especially when I see the images of what is happening in Gaza, but not only in Gaza, the absence that exists in people, the absence of being a human being, which exists in people all over the world. What kind of people would perpetrate the atrocities against the Gazans as Bibi Netanyahu and Joseph Biden have been doing? They are truly not human beings. I don't know what that makes them. I'm not an expert in elocution or in definitions. I'm a sociologist. But I could care less. I would gladly give all my money away, and sadly, I have too much of it. But I would gladly give all my money away right now just to be with the maiden. There is nothing I want more than to die at this moment. And I'm not suicidal. I would never kill myself. But I asked the maiden to take my life every night, and so far she has not seen fit to do that. But when I wake up in the morning, still sometimes I'll remember her in my dreams, our conversations in my dreams, but more frequently she will answer me with a thought that pops into my head. One of those thoughts led me to make this podcast and other podcasts. For the time being, this has been Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.